we're now going to turn to our teacher panelists, and I'm going to ask each of them just to summarise for us their experiences of presenting at a Classical Association conference. And then I'm going to pose to them some key questions about that experience. And then it's your turn. You get the opportunity to ask additional questions that I didn't ask them. So let's start with Andrew. Can you summarise for us, please, your Classical Association conference paper presentation?
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I wish I'd heard from Maria and Ian about how to write an abstract before I had to write my abstract. That was really useful. So I presented a paper in 2018 at the conference in Leicester. That wasn't my first Classical Association conference. I attended one once before in 2016 in Edinburgh, partly because I thought it would link with a visit home to Aberdeen, so it was all convenient. But I didn't have very much experience with the Classical Association conferences before that. Hadn't really had an intention to deliver a paper, but someone just suggested, you're doing some interesting work, why don't you present that at the Classical Association conference? So I'd been appointed in 2016 the assistant head in charge of co-curricular partnerships. So I'd been doing a lot of work thinking about independent state school partnerships. My school didn't really have a long history of those, so I had to have done a lot of work about even thinking about what partnerships are, how they work. I attended partnership conferences and done a lot of research into that. And I need to also get the ball rolling. So because I'm a classicist, I thought, well, classics is the way to go. It's a really great thing that we can offer out there. Primary Latin, GCSE classical civilization, those kinds of things. And so I'd actually done a lot of work on that. And so it was really, I thought, felt a really useful opportunity to bring all that thinking together and to be able to present a paper. But yeah, I really didn't know. I'd never, only obviously once attended a conference before, so I hadn't really paid that much attention to what an abstract is or anything like that. I only have an undergraduate degree in classics, so I hadn't done any masters or PhDs or anything like that. So first of all, when preparing an abstract for my paper, which ended up being on promoting classics through independent state school partnerships, luckily there's lots of the abstracts from the Classical Association online, so you could read through them, find ones that somehow might be slightly related to what you're doing, or at least kind of the format of them. So very much picked and chosen, like even words and phrases, a little bit of plagiarism going on there. But I think that's not a bad thing, especially no one else had done a topic exactly like that before. But that helped form the abstract, got some people maybe to read it just to make sure it made sense, and then sent it off. And I sent mine off as an individual paper, not as part of a panel. They had, obviously, there's like headings, and so one of the headings was teaching the classics. So it was presented under that, teaching the classics, but obviously that's a very, very broad category. But it was accepted and a panel was put together. My panel was quite random, actually. So the other papers in my panel were teaching Latin online in an open university framework, so obviously university one, and then Millennials and Millennia, an exploration into teaching classics to a new generation. So that was a very new teacher who was very new to the profession who presented that. So quite a random mix and assortment of papers. But actually, when we delivered our papers, there was a good audience there, a variety of different people. And actually, I don't think it was hampered by the fact that it was even that random mix of papers. And actually, if more and more teachers do submit papers, then the chances are there's going to be better connections between them. But anyway, I don't think it really did even hamper it being a random panel. I think just people found it very interesting. Everyone who attends the conference are interested in classics in general, and the papers are quite short, so it's interesting. And I think everyone's got something to offer that's interesting. Everyone wants to hear just interesting things. So even the fact that it was quite random didn't really pose an issue. Initially, I was a bit worried, thinking, well, surely to write an abstract, I've got to have written a paper in advance of being able to then pull out an abstract from it. But then realized, obviously, you just got to get the abstract in. So again, I wrote the abstract thinking about what kinds of things I might do, but obviously I got nowhere near writing out a full or thinking about fully what I was going to present. But obviously, as I said, I'd done work on it. I think all teachers are doing work on individual topics and things in their classrooms and trying out new things. So they are an expert in whatever they're doing. So they can write their abstract without having written out a paper in advance. So did that, and then got down to writing it. Obviously, teachers were very, very busy, so I didn't necessarily finish writing up what I was going to say in the conference until I got to the conference. Hadn't finished my. I think it was more actually I'd written quite a lot, but actually it was too much. So I had to spend quite a lot of time editing it down, finishing off my PowerPoint, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing that. But as obviously teachers are busy people, so it kind of gets always pushed to the end of the list. But anyway, I managed to prepare in time to deliver my paper, which was on a Saturday morning. But yeah, very good audience there, maybe about 20. Actually, the room was packed, like it was like standing room only. I don't think it was necessarily, I think maybe it depends what we were against, but it was a very, very good audience. So I did have a PowerPoint.
I have to stop you now because you're answering some of the questions I'm going to ask you later. So I have to move on now to Gemma, please.
Sorry.
Gemma, can you just give us an overview of how your CA experience presenting for the first time was for you?
Hello. So I spoke at the Classics Conference in 2019, which was held in London. And I spoke as part of a panel that ACE were running, advocating classics education. And the panel had been organised by Professor Edith Hall and by Arlene. And it was about the national campaign for studying ancient Greece and Rome in UK schools. So they contacted me, so I didn't actually apply to the Classical Association myself. I was contacted by Edith and Arlene because they were aware of some of the work that I'd done in getting classics started from scratch in my school in Leeds, where it had no history of classics ever been taught before. So they invited me to speak on their panel, and I did my section on classics in the comprehensive classroom, how to get classics started from scratch, which linked in really well. So unlike Andrew, where he'd been put together, we four all organised together exactly what we were going to talk about. And it all flowed really nicely from Edith Hall starting off with the establishment of ACE, and then Arlene speaking about the achievements of ACE. And then we had Paul Grigsby from the Warwick University talking about Warwick University's work in getting classics into schools. And then I spoke last about how I'd started classics from scratch. So I knew both Edith and Arlene, and I'd done some work with them in the past, which was why they invited me to speak on their panel. So I think in terms of organising, I had a very, very easy ride in that I didn't have to do any of the organisation. I quite simply had to write my abstract. And even then that was sent and put together with the other abstracts for the panel to then be submitted. But it was a really enjoyable and worthwhile experience, and I would highly recommend it.
Thank you. And then Pete, can you tell us about your experience of your first CA conference?
Yeah, hi everyone. I think my experience is probably very similar to Gem's, actually, apart from the fact that it was supposed to be in Swansea, but all ended up online. So I missed all of the schmoozy fun. It was basically just me in a classroom. But it was a really, really fantastic experience. It was really great to be able to sort of give a platform about what we've been doing with the Blackpool schools and to really promote that. You know, similar to Gem in terms of you know, writing an abstract, you know, I too had a little bit of an easy ride because Edith and Arlene had got in touch with me. They'd seen some of the work in some of the schools that we've been working with, and that's where that opportunity came from. I did completely cheat, a little bit like Andrew, when I had a look at other people's abstracts from previous conferences. So I did have a sneaky little search and a little look at what other people had written. And it was really great because it was basically just giving a sort of a general sense of what I wanted to say anyway in my slot. As I said, it was the virtual conference this year. And our panel was called Accessing Classical Civilization and Ancient History in Britain. And it started off with Edith and Henry Stead giving a discussion about sort of historically how access to classics had been particularly prominent, and then it declined. But it was some really interesting stuff about how classics had thrived in communities that you wouldn't have really expected it to. Arlene then discussed the opportunities that were available to students currently, and I was given a perspective, I suppose, sort of from the trenches, from the ground, as to similarly how classics can thrive in a community that, again, you wouldn't necessarily expect it to do. So yeah, it was a really fantastic experience, and it was great to reflect on all of the achievements that we've had in Blackpool and to really promote that.
Great, thank you so much. So in terms of asking questions later, you've got a mixture here of somebody who's applied with a paper abstract, so somebody who has applied individually, just with an idea of presenting something that they themselves have been working on. That's Andrew. And you also have some people who have applied as part of a panel. So you absolutely can ask questions if you are interested in the difference between those two things. Okay, now I have got some questions that I imagine might be the types of things that you're interested to know. So, teachers, what approach did you take to presentation style? By which I mean, did you read through a prepared script? Did you talk to a PowerPoint? Did you ad lib? Can you tell us a little bit more about that, please?
I did have a PowerPoint, but it was more with highlights on it. I'd really focused on preparing, although I didn't have it written down to read off, I'd really focused on my speech that I was going to say, particularly because I was making quite a big plea to the people in the room to make funding for classics for school teachers much easier. And so I needed to have a bit of gusto and passion as I spoke. So I didn't want it to be just laid out on a PowerPoint, but I definitely had it with just like the headlines on. I didn't prepare a handout or anything like that, though, just headlines on the PowerPoint, and then I'd prepared what I wanted to say.
Andrew, Pete, what was your approach?
So just, I had a PowerPoint, but again, it was mainly had a few stats on it, because I was thinking about classics in state schools and things and how we can do to support it. So mainly stats and things which you don't quite get from listening, but not particularly any word heavy. Focus was on the script, and basically, I basically treat it like doing an assembly at school, really. But I kind of write it out word for word, but then actually do enough kind of preparation that you talk away from the script, and because you want to be engaging to the audience. I mean, it's not great to have someone buried reading out what they do, but the way I normally work is write it out word for word in the first instance.
Yeah, I was very similar. I didn't want to read off a script because I wouldn't have been comfortable with it. So again, I popped together a PowerPoint with just sort of key ideas on, and then had a few sort of notes that I wanted to highlight as part of my presentation. I do think I possibly put a little bit too much in the presentation, and the time went very, very quickly, and I was trying to sort of run through things towards the end. So yeah, it was basically I didn't want it to be death by PowerPoint, but equally I wanted to have that little bit of ad lib side to it, because that's a little bit more my natural style of presentation, I suppose, rather than again reading off a pre-prepared script.
Ian, did you want to say something?
Yes,
here?
if I could jump in here also, I would like to stress that because this is going to be a hybrid conference, we have not yet worked out the details of how handouts, physical and online, are going to work, as well as it should be borne in mind that the current plan is to run all sessions as Zoom webinars. And one of the things that happens with a PowerPoint presentation on Zoom is that the largest amount of space on the screen of the audience is taken up with the slides, and comparatively little usually with the face or whatever of the speaker. So that's another thing to bear in mind if you are going to talk if you're choosing to use a handout or a PowerPoint. Okay, these are new considerations that we may not have had even a year or two ago.
Okay, that's really helpful, thank you. And thinking about the other presentations that you went to, would you say that they were similar in style to the presentation style that you adopted?
I think there was a much more variety among the academics. I think teachers are usually great communicators. That's why they're teachers. So I think any teacher doing a paper is going to be fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say that a number of the papers that I've gone to at the CA, people just stand and read from a prepared script, and there's less ad-libbing, whereas in the pedagogy panels, there tends to be more kind of engagement with the audience. So it's absolutely fine to approach your paper in that way. And as Andrew says, the type of communication style that you might adopt with your classes is completely appropriate to how you might think about communicating your the content of your paper at the CA conference. Steve, I think I saw your hand up there. Did you want to come in?
I'll wait until you've finished asking all the questions and then see what happens, okay?
Sure, yes. So my next question, and Andrew, you already gave us a hint here, was how many people were in the audience for your talk? So I think Andrew said there were about 20 people in the audience for his talk. What about you, Gemma and Pete?
It's hard to tell. I think there was maybe about 20 to 30 as well. But I remember us being in a room that could have fit hundreds. In a massive auditorium, and walking in and being like, oh my gosh, how many people are we presenting to? But then it was just about 20 or 30 or so sat near the front. And if anything, I actually think that helped a little bit in the end, because you had lots of other places to look as you presented.
Yeah, I think because it was online, I had two demons that were haunting me just off the screen, and one was the time count that was slowly getting down. I only, and when it got to like 5 minutes, it turned red or something. I was like, oh my god, I'm going to have to hurry up. And then the second one was the person count. And then I kept looking at it, and I'm sure it was like sort of 90, 100 or something like that. And I was thinking, oh, geez, this is a lot more people than I thought it was going to be. So, yeah, I think maybe because that was online, I'm sure, Ian would be able to confirm numbers or something. But I don't know whether because it was online, there was a few more. But yeah. But I didn't actually get to see anyone. Like I said, it was just me in a classroom, which, I don't know, might have been better for my nerves. I don't know.
Yeah, and I guess thinking ahead to Swansea 2022, if there's this, there is going to be this hybrid version, potentially there will be people joining internationally. So the numbers could be closer towards Pete's end rather than Andrew and Gemma's end. Okay, so my third question is, how did you handle questions from the audience? Can you tell us a little bit about your experience of that?
So for me, a lot of the questions were just aimed, because Edith was our panel chair, and some of them that got asked, she directed them at people to answer, or she chose people from the audience. So I think I only had about 2 questions from the audience that were specifically aimed at me. And they were all really nice and pleasant questions.
Yeah, I was similar. Arlene, I think you were sharing the questions, I think. What I was surprised though is I did get a few questions. I didn't think anyone would be massively bothered about the school teacher. But yeah, I was really surprised I know it's a bit weird. I'm very surprised to get the questions in the first place. I thought everyone would be more bothered with more academic side than sort of my experience. But yeah, Arlene was sharing the questions. And yeah, I was really surprised about the number that seemed to be quite interested in the school experience.
And obviously we had different, very different topics, so the questions were directed directly at me. Again, they were all very friendly questions, just interesting, probing, and so just a pleasure to answer.
Brilliant. Okay. So Peter mentioned there that I was the chair for his panel, and Gemma mentioned that Edith was the chair for her panel. So just to outline that every panel has somebody in the role of chair, and the panel chair has the responsibility of introducing the panelists and handling the questions. It would be interesting, I think, for people in this event to hear a little bit from the teacher's perspective about what your experience was of liaising with the chair, because I think this can vary very significantly between being contacted by them weeks in advance before the conference or hearing from them 30 seconds before the panel starts. So
my experience was just positive. Like I knew both Edith and Arlene, so our communication back and forth was pretty smooth between us, and there was quite a lot of communication. If anything, I think I'm maybe the slower one at responding to emails through my school emails. But yeah, it was super helpful. And when I got there in the morning of the conference, I know that Arlene was already there, and it was generally very positive. And I think that's because I already had a working relationship with my chair.
So because we weren't a panel that was, we were a panel that was put together, our chair of the panel was a teacher called Rob McLean, who works at Leicester Grammar School. So obviously Leicester University had contacted him to be the panel chair because it was being held at Leicester. And then he got in contact with us by email, maybe a week or so before, and find out just what we wanted him to say in an introduction. So his main role was really just to introduce each of us and just to keep, pass on to the next person. So that was his role. He got in contact by email, and then the first time we met in the flesh was at the beginning of the panel.
Yeah, and finally, my experience again was very similar to Gem's, because it was Arlene and Edith that were doing all the organisation. It meant that I knew exactly what I wanted to say sort of a few weeks beforehand, and I could blend it with what the sort of general theme of the panel was.
Okay, great.